Hey everybody, welcome to Pale in Comparison, a proud member of the Doof Network. In this podcast, my sister uses her knowledge of the Otherverse to take a look at Pact, Wildbow's least appreciated work, and I try to not give away any spoilers. I'm Jenny, and Malia convinced me to read Worm.
I'm Malia, and Jenny convinced me to read everything else. This episode, we are covering Breach, Chapter 3.5. Before we get into that, however, I'd like to issue a spoiler warning. This podcast is filled with pale spoilers. If you don't know who the Carmine conspirators are and don't want us to tell you, stop now, read Pale, and come back to this podcast. As for Pact, there will be full spoilers through the chapters we are covering.
All right, guys, we are excited to announce the Pale Complexions fan art contest. So if you couldn't figure it out, Pale Complexions is a combination of Pale in Comparison and Pale Reflections. Woo! So this fan art contest is going to be centered around the Otherverse, and our theme is siblings. Woo! Yay! So again, Otherverse only. No Byron and Tristan here. Sorry.
I mean, still draw Byron and Tristan and put it on Reddit, but yeah, because we're not gonna let you.
We're
win
not
our
gonna
contest.
You can't get money for it. Sorry. Not this time. This is Otherverse. So anything having to do with Pale or Pact or Pace.
Yes.
Or I'm blanking. Pyre? Or Poke. That's the one I was thinking. I was like, Poke. Poke. That's
I don't
right.
know what these things are.
Poke. That's fine. Poke. My goodness. I was like, you have an excuse because you haven't read it. I have. My bad. Pale, Pact, or Poke. So any of those, totally fine. Anything else that's not Otherverse, no.
Am I allowed to read Poke? What is that?
Not yet. You're not allowed
okay.
to.
Maybe we'll do a special.
We'll do a special later on.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that if you don't want to submit something to the contest, you can still participate by voting and selecting the winner. Our patrons are the ones who get to vote and select the illustrious winner of this glorious prize and renowned acclaim. And so if you would like to help select the winner, you can become a patron at patreon.com/doofmedia. That sounds right. And
we do a lot of prep before these.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so please submit. Submissions are due July 30th. And please vote.
Yes. All the information you need is going to be at doofmedia.com.
Yes.
All right.
Yay. On to the episode.
Woo. All right. So our chapter summary. It's not chapter summaries this time, guys. It's just a chapter summary. Hey, it's going to be fine. Blake has a very cold and unpleasant walk back to the house where he's followed by someone he didn't expect.
Dun dun dun.
Dun 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 dun.
Neither did Malia.
Neither did Malia. He and Rose then have another unpleasant surprise when they arrive at the house, and they end up having to call the lawyers. So we'll start with Blake begins the walk back to the Thorburn house when Rose and Dickswizzle come to the rescue.
Da, da, da.
Yay!
So he starts out with this like boot metaphor where he's like, the warmth is seeping out of my boots and they've been plucked from, unjustly snatched up from where they belonged in the wrong environment. Well, I tried to figure out the fastest, tidiest way of getting rid of them. And then he's like, oh, it's me and Rose. And I was like, wow, what the fuck? I was like, are you trying to get rid of Rose? That's mean. And I guess she was snatched up for where she belonged, maybe, even though she didn't really exist before, from what we understand. And like, yeah, the life is leaching out of you and it is being replaced by the cold, but that's not Rose's fault. You keep making dumb fucking choices and lying. And I love you, Blake. And I understand that you have a lot of things stacked against you, but this feels mean.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It might not just be like, he might not be saying that the Rose is the cold. It might just be saying like, here are these healthy rubber boots, except that they weren't well insulated against the cold, which kind of sucked, but they were fine for other things. But then the stupid practice shit keeps like fucking stuff up. I don't know.
Maybe.
But I mean, it also says he's tired, wrung out, emotionally drained, and it says a lot that he is thinking in crazy abstract metaphors like this. So he's kind of like, yeah, maybe it's not like, you know.
Sure, I can't really like. Sometimes I'm not good at seeing metaphor in books and stuff. Like you really have to like dig into it. So it's like, okay, like Wildber's, like on the one hand, he's very, very much pointing it out, but then he's also like walking it back by being like, oh, but I'm, you know, delusional or whatever. And also Wildbow isn't usually like this heavy-handed. I think it's kind of funny because it doesn't, the metaphor isn't perfect and he doesn't lay it out super clearly. And that actually helps me get into his like state of mind better than the metaphor itself. But it is like we are spending a lot of time thinking about, I mean, a significant amount of time at the beginning of this chapter thinking about these boots. And I was like, this feels important and also confusing. And I like how at the end of the chapter it comes back to the boots again. It's a really nice circle. But
that's right. I feel like you thought more about the boots than I did. I'm not going to lie.
I thought a lot about the boots.
You've always liked boots, though.
I love boots. Mom wouldn't let me buy boots because we grew up in Hawaii, and she was like, "You don't need that. You live in Hawaii." And I like always wanted them. And now my calves are too big. Oh. Yeah. So I do own a pair of cowboy boots, but it's a men's size, and they crunch down a little bit because my feet are wide, but then they crunch down a little because I have such big calves. I have to buy like the extra wide calf everything. So I really want like thigh high boots or whatever, and I just can't find any.
I feel like we're a family of big calves.
Yeah. I've just had people, I mean, I at least I work out occasionally now, and I ride my bike and stuff, but before when I did like almost no exercise, I mean I would walk to class or whatever, but I just had someone one day just be like, "Oh wow, like you have such great calves." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like they're just big and they prevent me from wearing boots." But thank you. Like I think they thought that I was like ripped or something. I was like, no.
Like no, it's just my stupid body. Hashtag relatable.
TMI.
It's fine. Oh man.
I think it's funny that like a lot of our listeners listen to our mom every once in a while, and so like you actually hear our mom, and then when I say shit like, "Oh, mom wouldn't let me wear boots," you like have a better sense of who that person is, but also she's not here to defend herself. It's funny.
That's true. Well, if we have a lot of people sticking up for, being like Bootgate or something, then we can, bring it up on her podcast.
Oh, wait. Okay. So this is cheating because I think this was mentioned in Back to Pact. Nope, not Back to Pact. Deep Impact. This is mentioned in Deep Impact. I think they were talking about implements, and Elliot was kind of like, oh, maybe like boots would be a good implement for Blake. I think he said that. And then I thought about how we made the joke about grandma's shoe implements or like high heel shoes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, oh, that would be a good thing for Blake. Like movement and action and like keeping warm and like all these things. And now he's like freaking out about these boots. Like boots. Like if it is boots, it doesn't count. Like I didn't get the credit. I can't take credit, but I like it.
What would be your second choice for an implement for Blake if it's not boots?
Well, like it feels like it won't be keys because he did the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
He explicitly was like not a paintbrush. It won't be a bag because he doesn't keep things hidden. Although a bag seems like can you make? Oh my god! Okay, wait. Can you make your bag an implement and a domain? Like, can you get a bag that's like a bag of holding where it's just like it's real big, but it's like Mary Poppins bag,
Mary Poppins bag.
Like I don't see this for Blake, but like that'd be fucking cool.
I mean, that'd be pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. Talk about a mobile home. I'm sorry, guys. I can't help it. Whatever.
Well, can domains be portal like that? Portable. Portable. Because the whole thing is like this space is claimed from the universe forever. This is so interesting.
I feel like Did they talk about like vehicles or something? Like a possible domain? I'm trying to remember in any of the texts.
I don't think so, but I don't remember.
You know what? I mean, I feel like if you can have a mobile home or you can have an RV, you know,
Yeah,
it just seems like that's a thing,
right. That'd be awesome.
you know? I mean, you can tell us if we're wrong, but I feel like seems like it could be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we probably should get back to the actual chapter.
Yes. But yeah, so this whole boot metaphor also sets up like how fucking cold Blake is and how much he's like, oh fuck, I'm like screwed. I don't have any clothes. Really, like I don't have any warm clothes. I'm running alone. I'm gonna freeze, and then the tension really ramps up because it's like there's an other and it's standing there. Oh my god! And then it's fucking Dickswizzle, and it's just so great. And it's like Rose was so thoughtful, and I mean like. Maybe if you're in the north or whatever, or like if you're in this environment, you understand that the cold is really like dangerous and bad and things. But this just struck me as like very, nice. Very thoughtful, very aware, very like wonderful of her, and like really does appreciate it, which is great. But like she like takes note of all the things that he's missing and like remembers to grab, and like part of it again is like everything with Rose and Blake is tainted by the fact that she relies on him to survive, like his survival is her survival and stuff. But I don't know, she just like gets all this stuff and she gets like the hatchet and like all these things, which are, it's very great that she ended up getting that much stuff from the house, turns out.
Thank freaking goodness.
Yeah. And yeah. It was just a great turnaround of like, oh, thank God, it's Rose and Dickswizzle.
how far behind do you think or how close do you think Dickswizzle was to getting caught in that whole like time thing?
Fuck. Yeah, because what do you think? Like,
I would expect
like 30 minutes passed between Blake leaving and them getting back to the house.
Well, because I would expect it would have to be before Andy even showed up, right? I mean, I guess they could have been in the middle of the ritual, but
the ritual seemed like it was happening fairly quickly. So he could have been like, "Hey, Andy, we're about to do this thing. Go do this."
Yeah. True.
But yeah, no, that's a good point that he had to tell Andy to go watch him. Yeah, I bet Dickswizzle. Well, my question is like, so he can kind of teleport, right?
Dickswizzle?
Like, yeah, like he definitely he can like jump into the whistle or whatever, but then he also got from that house to Hillsglade house and then like back to Blake.
You think it was teleportation or more like the Warrens or like
see, that makes a lot more sense based on what I understand of goblins. Rose didn't mention, oh, we went through some fucking tunnels. I don't know. I hadn't thought about this very hard.
I mean, she might not have really, at least.
Oh, right, because she wouldn't have been in the mirror still.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, glad he didn't get caught. Like, this chapter, it's like, oh, wow, Blake, this sucks. But on the other hand, like, things work out weirdly well for him in this chapter. Like, all things considered.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Also, just before we move on from Dickswizzle, Rose explaining her interactions with Dickswizzle is like super hilarious. She's just like, no, Dickswizzle, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, it's almost funnier than like really seeing it, just hearing her like reenact it. And it reminds me of how people say that like goblins are like toddlers. And I was wondering, Jenny, like, do you agree based on your experience as the mother of a toddler? Because Miko's not like constantly shoving things up his nose and whatever. But
no, but like, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to that. I mean, he's not as disgusting as a goblin. He's still pretty disgusting. He's a lot cuter than a goblin, that's for damn sure. But like, yeah, like one thing that you know about like a lot of people will say about toddlers is they're constantly trying to kill themselves, and that's like your job as a parent to stop them from hurting or killing themselves. And that's, I mean, goblins pretty much like, they're not going quite as far as killing themselves, but they stick all sorts of crazy stuff in their like I don't know, they like put
It's like just because they have more protection, like they can survive a lot more. Like it's the reason that they don't just fucking die constantly.
Yeah. And Miko, he likes adrenaline, which is not a great combo for a toddler, so he's constantly trying to jump off of really tall things. Fortunately, at least as of now, it's been with like me or like my husband's help in terms of like, okay, you have to hold on to us. But there's been a few times where like he like doesn't wait for us to actually hold his hand, and he just jumps, and it's like yeah, I'm really selling our parenting skills right now. But this is more, I don't tend to do this quite as much. But it does make him happy. But yeah, basically goblins are like really ugly, like foul-mouthed toddlers.
It's adorable.
It's pretty accurate, I'd say. So thank goodness that like toddlers don't look like goblins. I mean, there's a reason they're cute, because they drive you fucking crazy. It's a survival thing, right? Babies and toddlers and stuff, they have to be cute so that you don't want to murder them. Right. And sometimes you still want to murder them, but you don't, because you're hopefully not an insane person. It's a good comparison.
That's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Toddlers in comparison, our next podcast.
What supernatural creature is your child like?
Jeez. That's funny.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so Blake's karma is something that's really interesting throughout this chapter. I don't know if I should we'll just get into it because y'all read this chapter. So we're going to do this a little out of order. But I feel like the last thing was he left and was like, okay, Dickswizzle, destroy all this shit. And Rose comes back and it's like, okay, she told him to do it. They did it. But she was like, Leanne didn't do anything to you. Like, are you sure that was okay? And it like the mom, whose name I don't know or remember, was like, yeah, come into my house. It seems like there was some hospitality, something there. Like, it wasn't like, here are these food and drinks or whatever, but it was still like, you can stay in my home.
Yeah.
And then to turn around and like destroy her property. I mean, like he explicitly was like, don't hurt anyone, but that's still, and I find it interesting that, I mean, Leanne is probably the more sympathetic character. So I wonder if that's kind of why Rose / Wildbow goes back and is like, oh, she didn't do anything, but it feels
wrong.
Yeah. But to me, it feels equally wrong to Leanne and the mom. Although I guess the mom did participate in the thing to whatever. I don't know. But this makes me feel like, oh, this should have fucked with Blake's karma. But he doesn't get trapped in the time vortex. Like, Andy showing up and physically saying, like, hello, Blake, I am here to watch you, lol, prevented Blake from just kind of walking to his house. Like, like he doesn't get trapped. It's not a great situation, but it feels like it could have been a lot worse. And like similarly, if he hadn't been out at the party, like if he hadn't like instinctively decided to go see Maggie and then go see Laird and whatever, which seems like his karma should have already been somewhat affected because he said he was going to eat and then he didn't. Like, it's just it's this weird, and like it feels ridiculous to say like, oh, like they prevented you from going to the one place on Earth where you could actually be safe, but you like have better karma than you should. But it feels like he has better karma than he should. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, but he has really shit karma, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is just like a drop in the bucket. Maybe it's just like, I mean, yeah, it's bad, but like
it doesn't even matter.
It doesn't really affect it that much because it's not like he summoned a demon. Sure, he violated hospitality, but oh, whoop-de-doo.
Who fucking cares?
Yeah, who cares? Still shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe he's kind of does have a little. I don't know. Maybe his instincts are right about what he was saying to kind of justify it as well. But yeah, I feel like even if it is negative, which I would not shock me if it is negative, I just don't see it being much in comparison to like all the other shit that is piled on this family, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. Oh, Blake. So if Blake was a character in Game of Thrones, I know what house he would belong to.
Okay. That's
Blake
an interesting start.
Such a fucking Lannister. Every time he's like, I hate having debts. Like, I always pay my debts. Like, I'm just like, okay, calm down. Like, calm down, Tyrion. Like, I just, like, a Lannister always pays his debts is, like, big Blake energy.
Yeah.
And, which is funny because it's not actually the slogan of their house, but it's a better slogan than their actual slogan. So,
what's their actual slogan?
Hear me roar.
Blake the Lannister, hear me roar. I mean, I feel like that kind of fits him too, though. But
yeah, well, it's the only one of the major houses whose slogan is singular and not plural. From what I remember, like Baratheon, it's like ours is the fury, and like we do not so and whatever. But Lannisters is like, no, fuck the other members of my family. Like, this is about me. Nice. Which isn't really Blake's speed, but
no.
Anyway,
that was funny though.
He's really obsessed with the whole debt thing, and I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Like, it's somewhat admirable, but I also feel like he refuses generosity in a way. Like, I think that he interprets a lot of things as, oh, now I owe you something, and now I have a debt to you, that I was just like, oh, that like the woman who drove him to the house or whatever. I mean, like, I would see that as just like, you know, maybe offer, you know, pay gas money, whatever. But that just seems like a nice thing that someone is allowed to do, and you don't owe them anything.
I feel like I get it though, especially for him, just because like he was homeless for quite a while, right? So anything that he got, I mean, a lot of the things that he got in terms of food and things were probably just based on like the goodwill of someone, right? So that's hard because that takes away a lot of, at least from what I've heard, I can imagine this like taking away a lot of, it takes a lot of humility to just like, it kind of takes away a lot of your pride because you're always having to depend on someone. So I can imagine after he's, you know, finally able to get out of being homeless and get an apartment, which he still needed to like get help for that, but he's probably like, no, like I, you know, to get his pride back and get everything, like I need to, you know, make sure I'm doing this myself a lot, you know, like not just feeding off of other people. I feel like I've heard that from other accounts of people who have been homeless. I don't think I'm just pulling this out of my ass. But it makes sense.
No, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's what I would assume. And I would think that that'd be a hard thing to let go of.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, and it works really well as like, you know, this is the person who is trying to repay this like massive karmic debt. And like, it sucks that it seems like as of now, it will be literally impossible for him to pay off all the debt that he quote unquote owes. But it seems like this is a good person to have this like drive in this position or whatever. Like if your grandma Rose, you'd want them to be very motivated. And I think you are really right about that though. That's really interesting. Cause I just think like I feel like with my friends in undergrad, you know, sometimes somebody would pay for someone's meal or like whatever, and it wasn't like a huge deal, you know, like it would just, you would, you know, do it the next time and you wouldn't keep like obsessive track over it because it just felt like nicer and less like, oh God, am I okay? Are we okay? What's going on? But that is like a very privileged position to know that like, you know, I will have enough money next time and this wasn't super horrible for my friend.
Yeah.
And I'm actually like, yeah, now like very impressed. And I don't know why I didn't get this whole debt thing as much earlier. I really want to know more specifics about his backstory.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about how much you've gotten to speak with homeless people or like people who've been previously homeless or whatever, but part of like when I was in nursing school, kind of a slightly weird segue in a way, but I actually had to, I ended up talking with a lot of homeless people, partially because on Oahu, a good amount of the people who are homeless unfortunately need psychiatric help. And so a lot of, when I was doing my psych rotation, a lot of homeless people would be going into our facility. And it was a really crap situation because most of them, after they would be in there for like a week, they'd just go back to the street because they didn't have anywhere else. Like there's at the time, and I think it's still the case, unfortunately, there's not really anywhere for you to go. I mean, like, just because you're hospitalized for a psychiatric issue doesn't mean like you just might be going through a really hard time.
Right.
It could be for anything, like for depression, yeah. I mean, generally, if you're hospitalized, it's for something a little bit more serious, like suicidal ideation or possibly homicidal ideation. But like, I mean, yeah, a lot of these people just like, they're just people having a hard time. But it was interesting just getting to talk to some people about this would come up occasionally, try not to dwell on that necessarily if they didn't want to, but and then you take care of other people as well. It wasn't just, well, I don't want to say like all my homeless interactions were from with patients were in the psychiatric unit, because that's not true. I talked to other people like in med surg and different things. But I think this is also really random. You can cut this if it's not interesting. But I remember I followed a wound care nurse around.
Yeah.
And for like one of my clinical days, I followed a wound care nurse around on Oahu. And one of the patients she had was homeless and had this really, really bad foot ulcer, essentially. It's like a non-healing. It just was really bad. Because, I mean, if you think about it, like if you're laying on the cement, like most of the time,
right?
Like how are you supposed to get in a position, especially if you don't have good mobility, like where you're not getting, I mean, especially if you have a wound like that, like it's almost impossible to have it heal because it's not like you can put your feet up. And it was pretty infected and everything. One of the things that she got prescribed for him was Manuka honey, because honey, if you get hospital grade honey, is antimicrobial and you can actually put that on wounds. And it's cheaper than getting like some of the other antibiotic ointments. So that's what she got for this patient, at least.
Wow.
Yes. And again, doesn't really help with like anything else after the fact, unfortunately, after they leave, because you're getting in the same position,
right,
laying on the cement and but at least that's helps with infection a little bit. So kind of a random tangent there.
Yeah, that's really interesting and like thoughtful and sad.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of, we could be doing a lot better in our country, I think, for helping homeless. I mean, it's like a very multifaceted issue because, there are shelters and things. They have a lot of rules. So a lot of sometimes people just don't want to stay in the shelter because then a lot of times they're like, oh, you can't have any alcohol, or like you have a curfew. And they're like, I'm an adult. I want to do what I want. So some people find it more valuable to just not be in the shelter. And at least they get to have some more freedom. But there's also not necessarily enough room for people who do need it as well. So it's not it just kind of sucks. I feel like we could be doing a lot better as a country, but it's not an easy solution though, but it's like, we got to put time in.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, rant over.
No, it was good. It makes me, I hope we get, more details about Blake. Maybe we can think more about this, because I think it is really interesting.
Yeah. So I know when I was in school before I went to nursing school, like I had there's at least one person I can think of who did a lot of couch surfing. but he basically couldn't afford rent. So he slept in his car and he would sleep at other people's houses, but he was still paying to go to school.
Wow.
So it was not an easy thing, to say the least. That's hard. Okay, start talking because I keep ranting about random shit.
Okay. So they were thinking about what the ritual thing was, and they were thinking about how chronomancers can bank time, which sounds really interesting, but like I would hate this. Like the exchange rate of like you have to give up a whole hour to have 1 minute. I was just like, this is a nightmare. Like I don't have enough time. And like it seems like the nice thing about chronomancy would be, you know, being able to save and manipulate time, but you're not really saving time. Because it was like, oh, you could do that while you're sleeping, but then you just like effectively, I believe, like wouldn't actually sleep for as long, you know, and like that's not worth it. And like it's just, and I was wondering, like, is this time vortex thing a result of having banked a lot of time, or is it something else?
It's kind of random, and I'm pretty sure this is just because you use the term banking time, but this would be super useful for a bank heist.
Oh.
That's right.
Yeah.
Think how much easier Ocean's 11 would have had it, right? Just froze time for like a few minutes. Yeah, exactly.
Would have been a more boring movie, but
yeah, that would have been a really boring movie. Like, okay, guys, how much time you want to give up today? Yeah.
Anyway. I mean, for that much money, it might be worth giving up.
Oh, it would so be worth. Yeah, I mean, depending on the amount of time, but like, I'm sure you could deal with like even like 5 minutes or at the right time. You know, you know, you could. It'd be good.
And then the last thing is they're, you know, freaking out, and Blake says, "Oh, you're right, Rose." You know, like Rose is like, "Oh, you need more power," and he's like, "Yeah, definitely." And they start talking about a familiar because he's like, "Oh, if I'm so drained of myself, maybe it'd be good to do a weaker familiar who wouldn't take over me as much." And they're like, "Oh, well, you're good at glamour, maybe a fairy." And it's like, no. Blake would not get along with a fairy, and it'd be a nightmare, and it'd be awful.
Yeah.
So that'd be really bad. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm too weak." And then, but it's like, why does Rose never fucking come up as a possibility? They're literally like, "Oh, we need another mole." And then like, it just like, I'm like, okay, somebody mentioned it. Somebody shoot this down. Somebody say something.
Maybe they're thinking like if he needs more power, she wouldn't be a good one to go for.
I guess. I don't know. I don't get it.
You're just waiting for like the epiphany where he's like, "Of course, it's you. Let's do it."
I mean, like, I'm just waiting for them to be like, "Oh, this would obviously be dumb," or "Let's do it." Like, I need one or the other. Yeah. I don't get it. But yeah, so they're talking about the familiar, and then
Andy makes his presence known. Woo! And Blake attempts to appeal to his humanity.
Lol. I did not expect this even a little bit. This was very surprising. And it was just funny because it was like, they have the other, you know, that Blake sees, and he's like, "Oh fuck, who is that? What's going on?" And it's like, "Oh, it's Dickswizzle." And then Andy is just literally like, "Hey, don't pick a fairy as your familiar." Like, he doesn't, like, it's like, there's no like, "Oh god, what's going on?" It's literally just like, "Ah, what the fuck?" Like, it's like, I don't know. It was funny. But also, I feel like I really like Andy, except for one thing that he does. He's really intriguing, and he's really like a broken person, which is really depressing. But it's like very efficiently Wild Boat establishes like Andy and Blake have a lot in common. Like, they both feel it very indebted to people for reasons and can't escape from these situations they're in. And Andy's just like, "Yeah, I'm going to feel like shit if I have to kill you. And I'm going to remember all these things, but like, I'm still going to do it." And I just really liked him, but also I just like didn't know what to expect. And I had never really thought about this kid. And it was kind of like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Person.
Yeah. He's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I was curious as to like how he would kill Blake, because like it's like, oh, the knives and the guns, like that's Ava, but like I'm gonna take point. I mean, okay, the other thing is like nothing he's saying, like I'm very used to parsing people's words in this story, but this is a person who like knows about the practice but also can lie, right? So it's just like parsing Andy's words doesn't do much, because like maybe he wouldn't take point, and maybe he would just shoot him in the face, and maybe he won't care about any of this crap. And like I think that that's not as interesting of a story, and I don't think Wildbow's doing that, but it is like I find myself being like, oh god, like is he gonna take point? And then being like, oh, it doesn't matter if he doesn't, like. But also, why would he take point if he doesn't fight physically? Like, I guess the assumption is that Blake will use a demon and Andy is good with the like the ghosts and shit and something. I don't get it.
Yeah. We don't get a lot of information about that right here.
No.
We'll just have to see.
We'll just have to see. One thing that's sort of funny is Blake gets mad and he's like, people keep thinking that I suck. And he's like, Blake the fool, the unsturdy rock. And then I was like, haha, what if he picks a rock as his implement? Like, lol. That'd be funny.
That'd be kind of hilarious, especially, I was like, you have, well, I guess he can't get to the implement text now, but
presumably, maybe he saw the, like, literally don't do this. This is stupid.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, Andy does say you can be an idiot and a threat at the same time, which is a good point.
Super true.
That's so true.
Yeah. Yeah, I also liked, or I think he says this later, but, like, Andy said a lot of things that were really good, and I really liked the point that he makes where, like, if the hero in the story like foils the villain's plan, it's not just like over, like the villain, like in real life people just like fucking try again. And it's like I expected Laird to try again, but with Blake it was kind of like, oh no, he'll have to like regather his forces or whatever, and it's like, no, just like, in 15 minutes he's just gonna go back and finish this. Like it's very practical and also really like this interesting sense of reality and subversion, which is very on point for Wildbow, but also interesting in a story about patterns and dramatism and different things. To have like, no, he just went back and did it. Like,
Andy's like, I can keep talking if it helps. And he's like, kind of gives him some tips about like, or just like tells him like, for fairy, you can't get one unless you're a member of the Duchamp family, but you could get a Fairy, but then that'd be an idiotic thing to do. And then Blake's like, you're helping me? And he's like, well, it's more for me because I don't want to kill someone with a fairy familiar. It's like, it'd be the equivalent of murdering the mentally handicapped. And then that's kind of goes into what you were saying about the fool and stuff, which is pretty funny.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like, I love that fairy and fairy exists in this universe. And I love that one is super like conniving and manipulative and whatever, and the other one are just like dumb and flighty, and it's really funny. Like,
yeah, that's pretty funny.
It's like it seems like taking like Cherry Pop as your familiar, but like a fairy is like kind of seems like how they're described.
Yeah, pretty much. Poor Cherry Pop.
I know. I love her.
I do too.
Good girl. Good chapter.
Yeah. The most recent one was in Pale was the Cherry Pop interlude, just so you guys know. So that was pretty good.
And whoever was like, Cherry Pop's stubbornness is gonna break this curse, I was like, this is so good. Like, that person was totally right.
They were so right. I remember seeing that comment, whoever that was. And yep, they were totally right. Anyway, next part, Rose makes Andy an interesting offer.
Yeah, I really love Rose. Sometimes I forget that I love her. But I really loved this moment when Andy calls her like manipulative, and he's like, I've been manipulated by people who are better at it than you. It made me think of back in arc 1, I think, when Blake and Rose are talking about something and she's like, stop manipulating me, like I know what you're doing. Like, I think there's a good chance that Rose is trying to manipulate him here, but I also think that it is coming from a good place. One of the complicated things about Rose is like, it's like with the clothes and everything, like I think that her bringing all those clothes to Blake was like loving and compassionate and good, but also she has to survive. And like similarly, I think that her reaching out to Andy and being like, hey, this, like, if you ever want to talk, like, I won't sugarcoat things or whatever, but literally you can talk to me, is both coming from a good place and an attempt at manipulation and survival.
Oh, for sure.
And it's interesting. I mean, I think that Andy's going to, well, I don't know. God, I can see this going in so many ways. Like, I think Andy's going to be like a goodish character in this story. Not necessarily like a full-on ally, but he seems to do a lot of things in this chapter to give Blake and Rose a break that he didn't necessarily need to. I don't really see him taking Rose up on this deal, but maybe he will. I think I would like that.
Yeah. Could be interesting. Interesting interlude.
Yeah, I'm really excited for an Andy backstory. But yeah, the moment though that I was like, hey, fuck you, was when he calls Rose Blake's pet. I was like, no, like, absolutely not. Like, fuck off.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, but I feel like, especially to witch hunters,
others aren't people.
Others aren't people.
That's so shitty.
And she's not, because I mean, at the beginning, we saw like Rose, we're like, oh, it's obvious she's like the female version of Blake, but like to him, she's like, oh, she's just a vestige that's just there.
I guess. I don't know. I'm not
that
made me mad.
It's like a good thing, but yeah.
I also, one thing in my notes that I put is she's given off like big Katara energy again. Like, this is like big like mom energy and like a little bit of condescension thrown in. Like, I think like out of the main characters in Avatar, I am a Katara, but she has a lot of characteristics that I don't like about myself, but also a lot of ones that I do. And it was just like, she's just like, you know, Andy, you can talk to me. Like, it just felt very like Katara momming and kind of pissing the other person off and like kind of being right, but also in a condescending way.
Just out of curiosity, like, who do you see me as an Avatar character? If there's anyone, just wondering if you thought about this for people.
No, I've really just thought about it for myself, because it's like,
Fair enough.
Here's the, you know, which tribe are you or whatever, and I just like, a lot of things about Katara remind me of myself. I don't know. I feel like maybe a mix of like Katara and Toph.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, you're not a Zuko. You're more fun. But
not quite as like,
you're not a Sokka. You're not like, I don't know. Hey, everybody! Like, you're not. You don't trip over things. But you.
I mean, I do now.
Somewhat of a.
But pregnancy. Man, that's my excuse. At least I'm like clumsy.
But yeah, like, I mean, I think you have a lot of like momish, caring Katara-ness, and then you also have a little bit of like Toph can have somewhat of a temper, and she can just be like, she's like stubborn.
Yeah, that's
you
fair.
Are stubborn.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, I think I'm not mad at that. I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
That could be our other question.
That's true. People would be like, why? Like, this is not what this podcast is based on. Well, you know what? It's our podcast, so we do what we want. Anyway. All right. So basically, they get to the house and realize that Laird went through with the ritual.
Yeah. This was just a whole series or a whole chapter of like, wow, I didn't expect that. Like, one after the other. It's like Andy shows up, and then the ritual is finished, and then they leave Jacob's Bell. And then also, this is the last like main chapter of this arc. Like, none of these things were things I expected, and I'm very thrown in a fun and exciting way. But yeah, like I said, I think Andy was like, sending Andy after Blake was really good, right? Because if Andy hadn't gone up and been like, hey bro, lol, I'm gonna stare at you, I think Blake would have just walked up to the house without realizing what had happened.
Yeah.
because it was Andy like standing there staring at him that made him be like, oh wait, what the fuck's going on? And I'm curious as to whether, because Andy said some stuff at the end that confused me a bit about, like, because I was sort of thinking maybe Laird wanted Andy to stay hidden and like watch Blake get trapped or whatever, but he's like, oh, he wanted me to like see your face when you realized. And I feel like Laird's smart enough to have been like, hey, don't let him see you or whatever, if that's what he wanted, but maybe he was being all like mafia bravoso or whatever and just was like, yeah, go watch him, without being like, and don't fucking talk to him. And like because I think that if Andy hadn't done this, Blake would have walked up to the house and, you know, come out 6 months later and the story would be over or whatever.
True.
Did it seem like that to you, that Andy was like kind of subverting what Laird wanted, or was I reading that wrong? Because the end where he's kind of like talking about Laird and how he's like, oh, and he wanted me to tell you that he's gonna lay off or something. That was all kind of confusing to me. But I mean, that sounded like Laird was like, go talk to him. I don't know.
I feel like it could go either way. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, like, could tell, like, if Andy didn't want to be found, I mean, you could tell, like, Blake only noticed him because he spoke up and he didn't sense any connection or anything. Right. So, like, he could have been super sneaky if he wanted to, but he didn't. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, could be that that's exactly what Laird wanted, and he's, like, being a good lackey guy. Or it could be like, all right, I'm going to literally follow what you said, and you didn't specify all this other stuff, so fuck your face. I don't know. I'm kind of, at this point, I'm kind of on the fence.
Yeah.
But could be either way.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. I was also confused where Rose, like, Blake turns his sight off and just sees the coin on the ground, you know? And Rose doesn't seem to see, like, I guess if it's we've established that she doesn't have the sight. But I'm wondering, like, could she not see because she was behind him, or because she doesn't have the sight? / like, others have sight, I thought. I don't know what's happening.
I honestly kind of read this as that she was in the mirror and just didn't have a good viewpoint. But I don't know. You could be right.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure, because we've established that she doesn't have the sight, and he turns his sight off and sees the coin on the ground and stuff.
That's true.
But I just wasn't sure.
Interesting.
But the last thing in this chapter that really endeared me to Andy and Blake, because Blake's great, was that Blake gives the boots back. But he's like, hey, Andy, will you do me a favor? And Andy's like, ugh. And then he's like, hey, give these boots back. And he's just like, yeah, okay. Like, I like that Andy was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I also like that Blake thought about it. And I'm kind of like, I don't know. I mean, he thinks about how much he wants to get rid of the boots in the first part of this chapter, and then he manages to at the end. But also it was like then he's standing there in the fucking freezing cold without shoes on. I mean, I guess he, got shoes pretty quickly, but presumably.
Yeah. Presumably. Probably. It's true. But yeah, so Blake basically had that intuition that showed that, like, he was like, something's not right. And he's like, listen, Rose. And she's like, I can't tell if it's you or if there actually is something wrong. But yeah, it doesn't feel right. So good job, Blake.
Yeah, his intuition, man. It's a great... That high priestess. Good. It comes in handy.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I was curious as to which lawyer this is. Maybe it's not the named partners. Maybe it's just somebody else. But I'm like, who the fuck is Mr. Beasley? Will we ever meet him? And also, like, he didn't even think, like, oh, I don't know who this is. Like, he just, like, doesn't give a fuck about these lawyers, which is kind of funny. But also, I wanted him to be like, it was this guy, or like, it wasn't any of these people. But he's like, nope, just get me to Toronto, which was so exciting. And so, like, okay, I don't know. I'm excited. I'm nervous for Joel. I wonder if he has Joel's keys. I'm kind of hoping so I guess, like, my first, like, little mini prediction or whatever before we get to my, like, big one or whatever is I feel like we're going to have a time skip. Like, I don't this story seems very centered on Jacob's Bell, and I feel like I can't really imagine us like just going back to Toronto for an extended period of time and like existing there in the story. Like I can see them going back for a while.
Okay.
And I guess like they're fucked and there's a price on all their heads, and like I don't know. So maybe we will be there for a while. I'm excited to see like Lord of Toronto interaction and shit. But
are you kind of hoping that there's not a time skip, but you think there's going to be one?
No, God, I don't know. Well, now that I'm saying this out loud, it's like the council meeting's in a month. I don't know if they're allowed to be like, hey, we're going to execute him if he's not even there. But he needs to do that. He also is like, oh, you need to get a familiar, or, you know, you need to do one of these big rituals. Because I was kind of thinking, oh, this would be a good time to like, you know, skip some time, let them recuperate a bit, and then come back with like a plan. And that would be a way of letting Blake take a break without really letting the reader. I don't know.
True.
Maybe he won't ever make it. I don't know. He's going to make it to Toronto because the demon lawyers are going to like let him do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But we'll see.
All
right. So since you gave the little prediction, we'll just go to the big prediction. What is your bold and specific prediction for this week?
Okay. My prediction is, because I was thinking about Blake and the debt and how obsessed he is with it, and about how like this would be a useful quality in an heir for Grandma Rose. And then I was thinking, oh, I wonder if she knew about this. Like, I wonder if she had someone watching him in Toronto when she was trying to figure out like who her heirs would be or whatever. Because it seems a little dumb to base all of your choices off of like a 5-minute conversation. So my prediction is that there was some sort of person connected to this world, so either a practitioner or probably another, watching him in Toronto on Grandma Rose's behalf, and that if we experience Toronto, we will meet that person, and hopefully learn some more about Grandma Rose.
All right. Interesting. I like it. We will have to see. I think a good thing to compare, just because it is focusing a lot in this chapter, is basically the witch hunter aspect, right? So we see Blake talking to Andy. So how, I guess we could do this a couple ways. We could either like do how our protagonists like interactions with the witch hunter compared to the interactions with the other witch hunter, or just, I mean, we might want to do that because we don't know much about their backstory, I guess, right? So it's kind of hard to talk about like comparison of the actual people themselves in depth.
Sure.
So let's compare these interactions that we've seen.
Well, they're a lot different.
Yes.
I mean, so like, yeah, so the three that I'm thinking of, right, are Ava, Andy, and Raph, right? And so Ava we haven't seen much of. She just seems like she's really excited to murder people. Which matches a little bit more with Raphael because he is very violent and he doesn't seem to have any compunction about murdering children or anyone else. Because he's been like so scarred by what happened to him. Ava probably has some sort of like dark twisted something going on as well that made her want to murder everyone.
I kind of feel like that's a prerequisite as a witch hunter, you know?
Sure. Whereas like Andy doesn't want to and doesn't like doing this and hates this, but feels like compelled, I guess. Like he feels like he has to, right? But then so Raphael feels more like Andy to me in like demeanor. I guess I am just like comparing them as characters. But it's kind of like Raphael is kind of this, in his interactions with practitioners that we've seen, was more of a cross between them, kind of like he was a very determined killing machine like Ava, but didn't have any of the fun joy part of it. And like Andy seems to be very skilled based on what we know and very knowledgeable and very intelligent. And it seems like, I mean, and Raph with like the bells and all of it, and like figuring out that Sig was sentient and all of these things, like he can tell and he's very intelligent. Whereas I think Ava would like more like rush into a situation. But I mean, like the trying to shoot 13-year-olds versus going up and being like, hey man, don't get a fairy. Like that's different. I don't know how to compare those two interactions.
Yeah, that's very different.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for comparing those.
No
yeah,
problem.
I know it's like, how do I compare these?
Hey y'all, it's just Malia again. Jen's having a travel day, so she's back on her way to Texas. So in the meantime, I'm going to go over the discussion question answers for last week before we dive into the one for this coming week. Yes, so as a reminder, our discussion question last week was, if you could use glamour to transform into something for 1 hour, what would you change into and why? Macy1 says, something super abstract and inhuman, like waves on the beach. And I just got to say, like, I love that vibe. Like, that sounds awesome. Mr. Catfish says that they would like to turn into themselves 3 years into an exercise routine to see if it's worth the effort. And if it is, that would give them the motivation to go through with it. Fleet Feathers helpfully provided his pronouns. Thank you. And he says he thinks that always having windswept hair that intensifies in dramatic moments would be pretty fun. So overall, he'd amplify his own appearance to be more dramatic. Striking eyes, mischievous smile, rugged or dashing stubble, stuff like that. And he thinks it's good that glamour isn't real because he'd get hooked on it. Napalm Eagle says they're fursona, but also more seriously, a bird because flying is great. DJ Dufour says it depends on if they have access to other practices. Because if they do, there are probably lots of better ways to use glamour than just transforming into something. Fair. But if they only had access to glamour and no other types of practice, they would probably change sex because gender dysphoria sucks. Or they'd change into a giant squid so they can mess with people. These were really fun, and I like always seeing how y'all sometimes are silly and sometimes are serious and sometimes are both. It's always really cool to see what y'all think, and especially when I see names that I don't really recognize, either because I have bad memory or because there's new people. So either way, thanks y'all so much. This is always really fun to go through and see what y'all have said.
All right, so this leads us to our discussion question, which I do have to say I like the one that you've written down.
Okay, I thought it was somewhat relevant. There was also the toddler one.
Yeah, but I feel like you talked about boots a lot, so
okay,
let's go with it.
Okay, so our discussion question for this week is, if you were to compare yourself to a piece of clothing, what would it be and why? Are you boots that the warmth is leaching out of? I really hope not. But whatever you feel.
Hopefully not. Whatever you're feeling at this time. That's right.
Yes.
Right now, I'm not creative enough to come up with one right now. Maybe when we go over the discussion question, I will talk. I'll come up with one, but not right now, at least.
Yeah, same. This feels kind of tricky, but also y'all like the. I don't know.
You guys like the weird ones.
Some yeah.
I mean, no offense.
Not so.
I don't feel like that's offensive, but you guys like weird stuff, so it'll be fine.
Y'all are very creative.
Yes, that's a better way to say that. Still accurate, but all right. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a rating and review. To support our podcast, become a Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. You can also check out our website at doofmedia.com to learn all about the cool shows on the Doof Network. If you'd like to support Wildbow as he continues to write fantastic stories, go to patreon.com/wildbow.
You can follow the pod on Twitter at Pale Comparison, or send us an email at paleincomparisonpod@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for our Reddit thread in r/parahumans, where you can answer our discussion question and share your thoughts on this episode. In addition, if you'd like to see all of my predictions laid out, check out our episode description for a link to a prediction tracker. Also, don't forget our fan art contest that is due Friday, July 30th. The theme, once again, is siblings. And you can find out all the information for that at doofmedia.com or in the link below.
Get artsy.
Woo!
Woo! All right, this week's fun fact. A duck is named after the verb, not the other way around. This is because a duck ducks its head under the water to feed.
It's like my mind is blown right now.
I mean, that's what I'm here for, you know? All right, have a good week. Bye, guys.
Bye.